All right. Happy Friday, all. I am going to be going live here with Marnie. So, well, there she is. All right. Let's bring her on. Come on. There we go. All right. Marnie is hopping on. There we go. There she is.
Yay, there
There
you
she
are.
is. You made it. Thank you so much for joining, Marnie.
Of
Thank you.
course. How is
Thank
the
you.
move going?
Yes. So some people know I'm in the middle of moving right now. And when I was talking to Marnie, she was like, I am stressed for you.
I,
And you know what? This is actually a
my
welcome.
heart is beating for you.
It's a welcome escape, a little bit of escape from moving. My husband's making a run, and I get to hang out with Luna and talk to you. So
Hi, Luna.
this is Luna.
Oh,
Yes, but anyway, it's good. I think that this was perfectly timed. So again, thank you for being on here this afternoon.
my honor and happy to be taking
Yes.
some time out of your stressful day.
Yes. All right. Before we kind of hop in, I'd love for you to give a brief introduction about who you are. My followers, a lot of them know who I am. So a little bit about who you are and what you do before we
Sure.
hop
Yeah.
into the topic.
Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks for having me. And it's so nice to meet your followers. And hopefully, we can help some people today, or at least get some
Yes.
people thinking. My name is Marnie, and I live in Greenville, South Carolina, over on the East Coast. And I own my own business, Try Marnie Coaching and Nutrition, where I coach mostly endurance triathletes, but I also coach or work with athletes on nutrition. Primarily multi sport athletes, runners, bikers, swimmers, triathletes. That's my population that I love to help with performance, body image, daily nutrition, and just optimizing health and performance. I'm also a triathlete myself. I've done 16 Ironmans. I've competed in Kona 5 times, and I love the long distance events. I come from a swimming background, so endurance is my jam. I like to go long.
Your
Um,
jam. I love it.
yeah, and I love the mountains. I love animals. I've been a vegetarian for 28 years for animal reasons. But most of all, I just love people. I love being around people. I love learning about people, and I love helping people. So I think all of that has just led me to my passion, which is now my career.
And I think that your love for people definitely shows through the work that you do and the books that you've written. And I think that's 100% like in alignment and integrity with you. So I appreciate you being on. And I didn't actually tell you that I used to live in Greenville, or
Oh my goodness.
I went to high school, Malden High School. You don't know that yet. So
Wow.
surprise, I know the Greenville area. Another little
Oh my
connection we have.
goodness.
Yeah, it's been a while, but okay, so the reason that I'm really, really looking forward to this particular conversation is because you and I, Marnie, are experts in completely different fields in their separate regards, but they're really, really complementary. They're incredibly complementary, especially in a time like right now. And what I mean by that right now, because what I've learned over the last few weeks is that we got to be really specific with what's happening, right? Like COVID-19 is still rampant in our country, social and racial injustice, police brutality. That is the state of our country right now. And as a life coach, I work with my clients on what I like to build, what I like to call building emotional endurance. And what I really mean by emotional endurance is understanding how emotions play into our lives, what they are and how to live with them and how to process them in a
Mhm.
way that allows us to become bigger and better versions of ourselves. And sometimes that's self-doubt on the race course, and sometimes that's worry and stress off the race course, right? Like it looks different at different times, and this is where our worlds intersect. And I
Mhm.
think that's really, again, the complementary piece of it. And given our current circumstances, stress levels can be really a lot higher than what I would say normal.
Oh yeah.
Psychologically speaking, when stress levels are high, our intellect can be low. And when we cross that bridge of stress and nutrition, and we find ourselves in that compromised state, we often reach for those foods that just aren't as nutritionally dense as they could be, right? That are going to support us as healthy humans, but also as endurance athletes, especially those foods that have a higher concentration of dopamine. And so we can get that pleasure sensor filled. And what happens is we result in a higher stress cycle, right? In the body and the mind. So what I see if for us as humans and athletes is that we look for pleasure in food. But
Yeah.
from your perspective, you know, actually let me back up a little bit. From my personal experience, my dad passed away unexpectedly 8 years ago. And I know at that time, before I understood more about how the mind plays in nutrition choices, I reached for every comfort food that was available. Like it was anything that was close by. And I was most definitely in a cycle of overeating, and I dealt with eating disorder at that time. But I'm wondering from your perspective, you know, with your athletes or personally, how do you see stress impacting nutrition choices?
Well, thank you for sharing and being brave and sharing what you've been through, because I think that expressing that vulnerability is really important, because that's how we have that power to change. You know, for most of us, stress and food, they do go hand in hand. It's been a busy day. On impulse, you grab a bar of chocolate, you grab a bag of chips, you grab.
Hey, how did you know that? How did you know, Marnie?
Well, chocolate sometimes does solve problems. You grab a box of cookies and you only plan to take a few bites, and before you know it, you know how that scenario goes. And so stress and the hormones that it releases, it can quickly drive us to crave and to eat these high fat, sugary comfort foods. And if you've ever done this, you are not alone. I want to stress, literally, I want to stress that eating has nothing to do with lack of willpower. It doesn't mean that you're weak or lazy. We have all been experiencing these very unpredictable and unknown scenarios that none of us were ever prepared for. And so if you have gained a few pounds over the last few months, or found yourself emotionally beating yourself up is absolutely not the answer. Nothing good ever comes from this self-torture that is negative self-talk and shame. And when it comes to food, shame is probably one of the most painful and most uncomfortable feelings that you can tolerate, or that you don't want to tolerate. When people are feeling shame, it's not just, oops, I ate some cookies when I should have eaten an apple. It's more like, I have done something wrong. I am wrong. I am a horrible person. I am not worthy. I am not lovable. I am broken. So you're not a bad person or flawed if you have gained weight or because you've been emotionally eating. Now, discovering other ways to deal with these uncomfortable emotions, and something that you probably work on with your athletes, is the first step in overcoming emotional or stress eating. It could mean writing in a journal, moving your body, drinking a glass of water, reading a book, just calling a friend. But when I work with athletes, and this may sound kind of silly, but it's so important, is that one of the best ways to handle these emotions that come with stress eating is to adopt more of a compassionate practice towards yourself and your body. And this isn't easy, and it may not feel natural for a lot of people. We're so easy to critique ourselves, but to find those strengths, I mean, that's really hard. And self-compassion, it's not going to rid your life of stress, right? You're not like, I love you, body, and then, you know, you feel amazing.
One time done,
yeah. But it's important to show your body care and love, because your body is this extraordinary machine that has these great qualities. And when you address those good qualities, it's a lot easier to change.
Yes. I think that I love the fact that you spoke about the shame cycle, because it's exactly what I see with athletes as well. And the heaviness that comes with equating how we eat or the choices that we make in our food into who we are as people, that can become a large negative impact on how we show up and what our results are. Assuming that and sorry that my dog is scratching on the carpet back here. Just
totally fine.
Got all this extra space since we're moving.
Yep.
Assuming that the majority of the people watching this are trying to maintain some sort of active lifestyle or reach higher performance because they're following some sort of training schedule, what issues do you think that athletes need to be mindful as it relates to diet and performance, especially as we still are in this time of stress?
Yeah. Well, I think we should take a step back first and just talk about how stress affects the appetite, because as athletes,
Okay.
we have a really close relationship to food. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's our nourishment, but it's also our fuel. And so we have to have that good relationship with food. But
Mm-hmm.
stress can impact our appetite. And so we have to understand how it's impacting us, because if it's impacting us in a negative way, that is then going to affect our physiology and how we can perform during training. And that can lead into injury, burnout, sickness, and other health issues. So in the short term, stress shuts down our appetite. And, for a lot of people right now during these stressful situations, there's a lack of appetite. You just don't feel like eating. That structure in the brain, that hypothalamus, it releases a hormone and it suppresses the appetite. And then the brain sends these messages to the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys, to pump out all of this epinephrine or adrenaline. We know that word. And then epinephrine starts to trigger that body's flight or fight response, which is really just like a hyped up physiological state that just says, eating's on hold. And this is all very normal. An example that comes to mind, which I think our athlete population can relate to, is race day morning, right? Race day morning. And athletes just cannot even struggle to take one bite of a plain piece of toast because of the stress and the nerves and the anxiety. And that's why mental skills is really important before a race to help calm the body and mind. But if stress continues, as we're all experiencing right now, right? This all started in March with the COVID, and here we are in June. It is a different story. So the adrenal glands now release another hormone called cortisol. And we know that hormone. Cortisol increases the appetite and increases the drive to eat. And once that episode of stress is over, cortisol levels should fall. But if stress levels don't go away, March, April, May, June.
It's almost July.
And moving and everything else going on, the stress response gets stuck in this on position, and cortisol may stay elevated for a period of time. So food gives us this feeling of power and control and pleasure, all things that we crave and want in these stressful situations. So it's no surprise that when our stress levels increase, so do our cravings for comforting foods. And numerous studies have shown that the physical and emotional distress causes cravings for high fat and high sugar foods, or both. And so this is why we don't crave nutritious foods like broccoli and kale when we're stressed out. It has nothing to do with willpower, as I mentioned before. We want these high fat, high sugar foods because the brain receives this message and it temporarily inhibits activity in the brain that produces and processes stress and the emotions. So our brain is smart, right? It knows that if you eat cookies and you feel better, then it's going to trigger you to crave cookies every time that you're stressed. But this doesn't last. And we also have to know that overeating on comfort foods isn't our only vice when it comes to stress-related behavior. When you're stressed, it's harder to fall asleep, to stay asleep. It's harder to find that motivation to exercise. Alcohol is used as a coping mechanism. Our mind can race with thoughts, and it's hard to think logically. We get very anxious. And also there's gender differences as well. Women, when they're stressed, they may cope with turning to food, whereas men are more likely to cope with things like alcohol and smoking. So we have to remember as athletes, food drives behavior, behavior drives food choices. So we want to build a solid foundation of eating so we can prepare our body and mind in advance when we get to these stressful situations. If we have a plan as to what we're going to eat today and the meals and snacks are already or somewhat prepared, you have healthier options available. And you'll also minimize those food-related decisions that we make that aren't so healthy when we're rushed or stressed. So it's not about being perfect. We want to ditch that all or nothing mentality because we're going to make mistakes. We're going to have off days, and it doesn't mean that we're failures. We need to be kind to ourselves. And even if you eat a pint of ice cream, it doesn't make you a horrible person. It's just trying to have healthier coping mechanisms to deal with these stressful times.
And also just, I think, an awareness of what's happening, right? I love everything that what you just said, because it shows up the same in my world, right? Like, so what you just said, how there's difference between genders, women tend to use food, men might use smoking or alcohol. I call those actions, those behaviors, buffering. What we're trying to do is we don't want to feel the actual emotion,
Nope.
which might be worry or stress or boredom or whatever it is. And so we look to these other activities to take our mind away from it, to avoid processing those emotions. And it shows up differently, sometimes for different situations. But I love what you said, planning ahead of time, because what we end up using is our prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that's more evolved to plan ahead of time, create those decisions ahead of time. So then all we have to do is follow through. And that's so important in so many aspects, so many actions that we take on a daily basis. But nutrition, I think, is even more important right now, when we could tend to fall into those decisions, those impulse decisions that tend to be less healthy. And when we create those responses in the brain, then our brain wants to go back for more, right? This is why people that tend to drink often need more and more and more alcohol, because of the concentration, and our bodies and our brains become almost immune to the response in it. It's really fascinating, really, really fascinating.
Yeah. And, if we think about it, that stress is often because we feel overwhelmed or out of control. And in my space and working with athletes and nutrition, it's natural for a lot of athletes to cope with these uncomfortable and unpleasant feelings with food, but not overeating, but restriction. And athletes then want to restrict because then they feel like they're gaining some control. And that can then unfortunately lead to disordered eating, or dieting comes first, then disordered eating, and then eating disorders, or even over exercising. So a lot of athletes right now may be, whether it could be consciously, mostly, that it's over exercising and under eating. And you can trick yourself to think that you're alleviating some of these uncomfortable emotions, but in reality, stress is just exacerbated. And when you become so fixated on food and exercise in your body, it can really overtake life. So that's something we have to be mindful of right now. And for a lot of athletes, it's learning how to use this time of finding some more food freedom, and maybe changing up the exercise routine instead of just trying to be on all the time.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it, that can alleviate stress, even if it's not nutrition related. Because I think that we can both agree as athletes ourselves that stress is stress, right? Whether it's physical or emotional.
Absolutely.
It's going to show up in the body at some point, or in our performance if we, do get to race at some point this year. And from my perspective,
crossing our fingers.
Stress, what was that?
I said crossing our fingers.
Yeah, right? Don't cross both of them. We don't want to jinx it. From my perspective, stress is something that, if we're willing to feel it versus avoid it or resist it or react to it, which can, show up in different behaviors, that's when we're able to really open up to the intentionality behind what emotions are. And fully processing our emotions allows us to create a new, generally more positive relationship with our emotions versus, when we don't want to feel them and we avoid them and we push them away with food. From your perspective, are there certain choices that we can make, specific choices that we can make as it relates to stress and our emotions?
Yeah, that's great. So a few tips here. Check in with yourself. Like, self, how are you? This is one.
Just basic. Self, how are you?
Yeah. And this is one of the easiest ways, but it's so difficult. Just like you just said, is we don't want to feel those emotions. But checking in with yourself. Why are you eating? Why are you craving this? Is it because you're hungry, biologically hungry, and you need nourishment and you need fuel? Or is it because you are stressed and anxious and are trying to deal with those uncomfortable feelings? In general, as our human biology of digestion, we should be hungry and wanting to eat every 2 to 3 hours. This is good. And so if you, it's so easy to stray from our normal dietary patterns with all the things that are going on, but you want to have some kind of normalcy with the diet and stopping your day to eat and eat mindfully. And that should also help. So when you do check in with yourself, you'll have a better understanding of why you're feeling what you're feeling. Also, when you eat, think about the emotions that you're feeling. Are you bored? Are you anxious? Just do a little pause before you start to eat, and to ask yourself, what compels me to eat this, or, indulge. Tempting foods. Tempting foods within eyesight can definitely lead to snacking, grazing, overeating, especially when you're not hungry. And research shows that just that visual exposure, that jar of candy in the office, just seeing that, it stimulates the brain, and it modulates impulse control, which leads to cravings and overeating. And this can turn into a habit, right? So every time you're stressed and you eat something, let's say a cookie, every time you get stressed again, you're going to crave that cookie because of that coping mechanism. Or you may crave a specific drink or food. So it's really important to keep those tempting foods out of sight: candy, chips, dips, cookies. And if they're just too tempting, keep them out of the house. It's not about it. Right now, we don't need to learn how to be mindful eaters, right? We just need to learn to do the best that we can. And if it's too tempting to have it in the house, just get rid of it. There's also nothing wrong with a tasty indulgence when you're not hungry. I mean, we can't just say, I'm only allowed to eat when I'm hungry. As we talked about before, chocolate sometimes solves problems. It definitely solves
100%.
problems. So it's only when you overindulge too often or skimp out on those nutritious foods that it can lead to impacting your physical and mental health.
When you're working with athletes, how do you distinguish when you're overindulging too much? Is that just like, how do you know?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think it's going to be different for every individual. Overindulging is a tough word. I would like to use the word, maybe start with snacking or grazing, because overindulging kind of has that, at least in my opinion, has that mindset. I'm eating something that should only be on occasion, right? It's only a treat. And so I think it goes back to the snacking and the grazing, and just not being very mindful of why you're eating what you're eating. And so we need to structure the day so you have your meals: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Doesn't matter what they look like or when they occur, but you have your meals. And then we don't go more than 2 or 3 hours without eating. So we have our snacks in between. Yeah. And if we can be proactive and write these things down in advance, so plan your day out in advance rather than being reactive, we're much more likely to hold ourselves accountable, have these things prepared, and to follow through. And that boosts our self-confidence, and that makes us feel good. It's not about sticking to it perfectly, but it's just putting you in the driver's seat so that you can make good decisions for the day. What I don't want to see from athletes is that they're eating some almonds here, they're having some cookies here, they're having some carrot sticks here, and then they had breakfast, but then it's 6 o'clock at night and they didn't eat lunch. Or maybe they're eating pretzels and cheese and chips or whatever at 5 o'clock, and it's like, oh, now I've ruined my appetite for dinner. These are the things that won't create that structure in the day. We need to bring back the meals that are assembled of carbohydrates, protein, and fat, because all of those great nutrients are designed to not only give us nutrients to support our metabolism and our health, but also to keep us satisfied so that we aren't so fixated on food every hour of the day.
Yeah. And I want to shift into how this shows up more in the climate of, diet choices and how it relates to different cultures and races. But before we go there, I'm actually really curious as to how when you're working with someone and they tend to do that grazing, snacking sort of deal without really even being aware of it, how do you offer the shift into planning ahead of time? Like, what is your go-to mechanism for doing that?
Well, usually we want to look back and what's happening before it, right? It's kind of like triathlon. If you're struggling with running off the bike, what's happening on the bike, right? And so we want to look back to set us up for good behaviors. And I'm all about working on a good, better, best system. So it's not about, I'm going to tell you what to do. We work together as a team and we make small changes, because small changes are realistic and they're doable. And it's something that hopefully can be sustainable. So if somebody is grazing throughout the day, then we need to look back. Maybe they didn't have enough fat or carbohydrates or protein at the breakfast meal. Maybe they were going too long without eating. So we want to look at what are those triggers that may be contributing to the grazing. The other thing too is that people are just mindlessly eating because they're working and they're multitasking, and they don't want to stop to eat a lunch, or there's no lunch, as an example, prepared. And it's like, oh, well, that's in the mind. That's too much work to prepare lunch right now, or to stop my day because I need to get this done right now. So I'll just eat a bar and I'll just eat an apple. And that's where those things happen. So it's some breaking habits, and it's some learning some new tool sets in order to set yourself up for these good behaviors.
Yeah. I think it's so fantastic that you compared that to triathlon, like what's happening before that. It's so true. And it's almost as if the way that we build consistency over time in triathlon, right? Like that lends to better race performance generally. Same thing with nutrition choices. Yes. Like if you good, better, best, but you learn those habits and you build them over time, and then your body responds in a different way, and it just becomes more of a habit, it seems like. Yeah. Okay, so kind of shifting. Right now, there is a lot of listening and learning and acting in the, within our community, triathlon community, but also in the space of the world because of the racial injustice that's happening. And for me, in the last few weeks, actually 2 weeks ago, today, Friday, I was feeling a lot of guilt and shame being a biracial female living in privilege for most of my life. And yes, I've experienced racism, but my experiences don't compare nearly to what others are experiencing. But what I've realized over the last few weeks as I've been, working on those emotions and working with my personal coach is that every single one of us has our own experiences, and they are valid, even if they don't look like someone else's or aren't as bad as someone else's, because our personal experiences are our way to build the foundation for us to move forward. And I think that's the space that we're in right now. Yeah. 2 weeks ago, I was very frustrated and very angry, to be honest, with Ironman, the brand, because they hadn't made a statement yet about the Black Lives Matter movement. And I know many other people were feeling the same way. And social media can create this bubble where we gravitate towards people with the similar interests and ethnicity and age and socioeconomic status and, et cetera, all the other categories that we put ourselves in. And I'm curious from your perspective as a registered dietitian, and as it relates to diets, there's a similar sort of pattern that happens. Yes. Like people, it's like a cult-like perspective where we gravitate, we want to fit in, we want to have, it's actually human behavior. We want to fit in, we want to be a part of the tribe. And I think that shows up a lot in the nutrition space. And with our country normalizing certain diets and glorifying disordered eating and those behaviors, I'd love to hear your perspective as it relates to dietary intake and behaviors and patterns with different segments of population, especially with the race and culture differences that we're noticing in the world right now.
Yeah, this is a heavy topic. And I'm so glad that we're covering it, because I do think during these times right now that we need to talk about this, because it fits in some capacity. It may be a small capacity, but I think it's really important. It's important to remember that we all fall into a different spectrum of what we consider healthy and nutritious, and what we can access that is healthy and nutritious. And so the composition of your diet, my diet, and somebody else's diet, it's impacted by so much: gender, occupation, education, socioeconomic status. And being able to choose a different diet to follow, it's a privilege. It's Absolutely. A privilege that many people can't afford. Things like choosing goji berries and cashew milk and almond butter and organic fruits and vegetables, and having a fridge full of food to choose from, and even throwing away food that you didn't want to eat or went bad. It's a beautiful luxury. And we can't forget that there are 41 million Americans facing hunger, and 13 million children facing hunger. And these people aren't following intermittent fasting. They're not hungry because they just finished a hard workout. These people don't know when their next meal will occur or where it'll come from. And many are malnourished. Many of people cannot drive to the grocery store. They can't access healthy foods. So when we think about diet, it is so much more than just eating the right foods. It's
Right.
what works for you as a whole person. It integrates your emotions and your environment and your physical and mental state, your culture, your race, your personal values, ethics, beliefs. That all influences your individual style of eating. And we live in America. It's a beautiful fusion of nationalities and cultures and ethnicities. We should all be very proud of our heritage. It's an expression of our cultural identity. But unfortunately, we have once again just normalized eating to fit into one subgroup.
Mm. Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think that we're realizing that more even now, right? Like I think it's bringing up all of the topics where we have blanketed one or put one topic into one category, right? Without recognizing the differences between different people and how it shows up in different areas of the world. Why do these dietary behaviors and histories and the patterns, why is it important to take those into account when we're deciding on our own personalized diet or nutrition
Well,
plan?
I think that the biggest reason is that it affects our body image. It affects how we think about ourselves. Even in this global health crisis and everything else going on, that weight loss and appearance and body image are still priorities for a lot of people, a lot of athletes, and a lot of businesses. So if it's okay, I'd just like to talk a little bit about body image.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So body image, it's how we perceive ourselves and our body and the manner in which we feel about our body. And it's influenced by so many factors. Many things contribute to body image, such as the environment which we're immersed in, right?
Mm-hmm.
We talk about privilege. We have access to so much. Our biological makeup and our genetic predisposition. And the culture that we're surrounded with, whether it's our triathlon culture, our women population, our athlete population, however we want to bubble ourselves, right? That this culture has such an impact on how we feel about ourselves and the manner in which we think about our body. But also we should think about there's a lot of cultural traditions that contribute to body image and can influence that negative or positive body image and self-esteem. So when we think about culture and everything else going on right now, people may find themselves either building a healthy body image or tearing down their body image. So let's just think about the Western culture that we live in right now, right? Mm-hmm. Our Western culture is one that is so hyper-focused on dieting and body appearance. And although our standard of what is beautiful has changed over the years, right? It was this voluptuous, full-figured woman with curvy hips and everything. Yeah. But now people feel pressure, even more so, to change the way that they look. So we've moved away from that. And the diet culture itself, it's constantly telling us, you're not good enough at your current weight. If you were thinner, if you were more toned, if you were more defined, you would be happier, you would be healthier. And this is reinforced because we see that. We see
and
people.
Even, can I add, even like you will race faster.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And we see that, right? We see that tie between popularity or success with looks. In other words, if you change what you look like, it will make you happier, more successful. It'll make people like you better. Photos are digitally retouched. There's filters, and people choose what we get to see, especially on social media. I mean, just think about it. If your social media feed, and I was just guilty of this as well, because I was like, I need to diversify my social media feed. And I'm not on social media a whole lot. I'm not scrolling through, but I'm like, gosh, I want to see different things. And so if your social media feed is filled with people that maybe look like you or your idea of what you should look like, diversify your social media feed. It will give you so much joy and happiness, and get rid of some other people that are tearing you down. And research shows that body dissatisfaction It's more pronounced in affluent countries, and people may experience greater pressure to conform to this ideal body image, just because we have so much access to magazines and TV and social media. And some of the strongest sources of thinness for white women is from the media, peers, family, whereas for Black women or biracial women, it's peer attitudes and maybe family pressure as well. This is research based. There's also that issue of weight discrimination, where overweight or obese individuals, they're viewed as not normal, and they experience so much prejudice and stereotypes. And we can take this even further. How about discrimination and prejudice, right? That can contribute to eating disorders among ethnicity or ethnic minority groups, the LGBTQ community. They experience different, how they perceive their body. Transgender people may experience that distress from their gender identity versus their biological identity. And this can have an effect on body image. Ethnic groups in our nation, there's stigma, prejudice, discrimination that causes stress and body image issues. It's not so much about eating these right foods, but it's really thinking about, I need to connect to something that will protect me from the body image culture that's out there. And especially if you are part of a group that's not the privileged group, right? Unfortunately, it's so sad to even say that. There is greater risk, and we need to identify that. So let's celebrate cultures and celebrate people for what they're capable of doing and not their appearance. This thin ideal, it's got to go. It's not the case in other parts of the world. I mean, in some parts of the world, larger bodies, they're preferred because they show wealth and power and fertility for women. But unfortunately, a lot of countries are actually moving to thin as the ideal because of globalization and this Western media. And they're receiving the same messages that we are, that thin bodies are the most attractive. And even for women are gaining so much power in equality, but we are still encouraged to discipline our bodies through diet and exercise in order to look differently.
Yeah, I'm curious. I hadn't even realized how the Westernization has changed the perspective in other areas of the world, but I'm curious how this works with athletes, right? Because as a person of color, and I've been racing triathlons for over 10 years, I noticed as I progressed through the sport that the pointy end of triathlon, the faster side, is not diverse. And I don't just mean by color of skin, but also by body type, right? Like the pointy end looks a certain way currently. And with your business and a big part of your consulting being helping athletes develop a positive relationship with food and body, how does this show up for you and with your athletes? Why is it important? And how do you help athletes take it to the next level, their fitness, their performance and such, as it relates to body image? How do you consult people on that?
Yeah, we need to focus on, first of all, I never talk about weight to my athletes. So I never tell my athletes they need to lose weight. I never tell anybody that if they look differently, they would be a better athlete. I just don't think that's very conducive to performance or improving mental health. I want body composition to be an unintentional effect of good lifestyle habits. And so we want to think about, let's train and let's eat healthy for the benefits that provide us, instead of just building muscle and losing weight, right? That overall well-being and quality of life. As coaches, we really need to make sure that we're being role models for our athletes and not saying, if you lost weight, that you would be a better athlete. That we need to make sure that we're not commenting on appearance. And I hear it all the time. Oh, look at that athlete. They look race ready. Or, we've heard so much about biases and prejudices and stereotypes. We do it all the time as athletes, right? We stand at the start line and we're like, that person looks fast. That person looks fit. but it's like, how can you say that just because they have defined muscles? And it's like that thin people are healthy and overweight people are not healthy. You know, we cannot make those assumptions. There are a lot of successful athletes that don't fit that mold of that ideal body image. So let's follow them. Let's share their stories. Let's introduce these other people. And the other thing too is success looks different on everybody, right? There's other factors that could help an athlete excel at the pointy end of the sport. It's not just about weight, but if we just bring it on weight, then we'll always be reminded that only weight can get me here. So we need to just make sure that we don't have these unrealistic expectations, or conveying messages that you will be better if you changed your weight. And I also think that it would be great to have more diversity in the sport and showing different images of athletes and different body types of athletes, instead of just reminding us that there's only one look. And if it's not going to start on the bigger scale, we can at least do it on the smaller scale by who we follow on social media.
Yeah. And I think that my hope is that over the next few years, we'll start to see that diversity change as our country and the world shifts to spotlight more people of color, you know, Black, Indigenous people of color, whoever it is, to bring more awareness to all of us, like bring it to the forefront so it can be included in our feed. And that, you know, that's one of the reasons why I started the Diversified Triathlon movement, is for the ability to bring more people into the sport, because there's so many people that don't even know that triathlon exists as a sport. So many BIPOC athletes that don't know. And so, you know, with the movement, it's beginner athletes, but beginner triathletes, but that doesn't matter because we have to start somewhere. Exactly what you just said. When we start with those small scale grassroots, then we can build and snowball the effect. And, you know, when it comes to Diversified Triathlon movement, I'm so grateful that you are going to be part of it. Marnie is going to be one of the coaches that is coaching a couple athletes coming up in the next few months. So it's really exciting to be able to bridge that gap, bring in diversity, hopefully diversify our sport, but also provide education like this so that the athletes, whether they're new or, you know, amateur or experienced athletes, that they get to learn about nutrition from a different perspective and how it shows up and how it can, you know, impact our performance and how we live our lives, right, in this world now with the stress, but also as we move into the next phase. Yeah. So is there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just, you know, success, that was beautifully said. And I'm so glad for what you're doing, and I'm honored to be part of it. And this is long overdue. So thank you for taking that initiative. You know, success looks different on everybody, and everybody has the right to feel comfortable and confident in their own skin. And we need to surround ourselves with people that lift us up and don't tear us down. And, you know, I want to see more people in the sport of triathlon. I don't want to hear people saying that I don't fit in, whatever that means, right? We want to make our sport more inclusive. And I think it starts within ourselves, how we speak about our body, how we think about our body, and that we are more accepting and give our body a more loving environment. And if we can do that for ourselves, that good positive energy is then going to roll over to other people. And I want to believe that we don't have these biases and prejudices and differences that are keeping people out of the sport. But in order to really bring that inclusive environment, we really have to think about how we're projecting ourselves so that it has a good message to other people as well.
It starts with us, right? Like we have to take responsibility for how we show up so that we can provide that amazing example as humans, but also as coaches. I think that's a really important part of it as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Marnie, so much for being here. Can you let people know how they can find you and learn all of the amazing things from you?
Oh, well, thank you so much. So I'm pretty active on Facebook, Try Marnie Coaching and Nutrition, and on Instagram, Try Marnie. And so those are my two social media feeds. So people can follow me there. I'm either posting pictures of training, quotes, my animals, or nature. Yeah. So lots of a variety, a hodgepodge of things. Did I say food? Food as well. Yeah.
Let's add that. I mean, it seems relevant.
Yeah. Food.
I've seen quite a few pictures of your dogs, which I really like. I'm a dog person too. But
Yeah, I love my little dog.
fantastic.
Yeah.
And they'll be able to keep up with you with the Diversified Triathlon movement too.
Yeah, that. And then trymarniecoach.com if people have any questions. I do have a few books out. Essential Sports Nutrition, Athlete to Triathlete, which is for beginner triathletes, and a running journal. So if those are all available on Amazon. But reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm pretty easy to access.
Fantastic. Thank you so much again.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, yes. And we will have to do another one of these. Thanks
Can't
for watching,
wait.
everyone. And
After your move.
yes, after my move, let me go finish that move up right
Yep.
now.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Yes, you too. Bye, Marnie.
Bye.